My name is Jessica Ann Mitchell Iwuyer. I'm the founder of the National Black Cultural Information Trust. Welcome to the Juneteenth Town Hall, Future of Black Freedom. NBCI Trust is a Pan-African initiative that uses communications, media, and cultural storytelling to correct and challenge cultural misinformation. Our work aims to uplift the collective survival and freedom of Black communities through informative resources. Our work is centered on embracing collective cultural memories from the Black community and Pan-African world as tools for education and solutions. Juneteenth began as a celebration in Galveston, Texas to commemorate the freedom of African Americans following General Order 3 on June 19, 1865, 2 years after Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Though it began in Texas, this celebration of freedom was embraced by African Americans nationwide. Juneteenth celebrations were held in remembrance of our ancestors and as a reminder of our ongoing collective struggle for freedom and human rights. In this moment, I invite everyone to join me in a brief moment of silence in remembrance of our ancestors. Thank you. Black freedom encompasses many things: our well-being, health, education, human and civil rights, history, cultural awareness, and much more. Today, as we commemorate Juneteenth, we have an amazing panel of Black women, artists, activists, historians, and all-around change makers. We will learn about their work and discuss the different ways in which we can both individually and collectively advance the future of Black freedom. Today we have with us attorney Nkechi Taifa, founder of the Taifa Group, Justice Roundtable convener, author of Black Power, Black Lawyer, My Audacious Quest for Justice. Dr. Gina Page, president and co-founder of African Ancestry, Inc. Nicole Austin Hillary, Executive Director of U.S. Program Human Rights Watch. Dr. Kimberly C. Ellis, AKA Dr. Goddess, historian, storyteller, and curator. Rosalind Y. Daniels, founder of Black Health Matters, and Aya Anelli, activist, speaker, life coach, and CEO of Aya Anelli International. Welcome to all of our wonderful speakers. Thank you so much for joining us today. Everyone, we're live on both Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at NBCI Trust. So if you would like to watch there as well or retweet, please feel free to use the hashtag Juneteenth NBCIT. Our first question: what does Juneteenth mean to you, and how does this connect with your work at this time? I would love to start with you, Dr. Page.
Thank you for having me. I think the connection of Juneteenth and African ancestry really is about remembering who you are. At African Ancestry, we help people reconnect to Africa in a very tangible and specific way. And acknowledging Juneteenth, understanding that that part of the historical process that we participate in, helps to give context to who we are today, just like knowing your ancestry down to the African country and ethnic group does. So that would be the connection for me, remembering who you are.
Thank you. Rosalind?
I would say that the resilience shown by our ancestors is just amazing, and that the pandemic of racism is still very much upon us. So even though our ancestors were enslaved, they did not give up. They had no rights, no property. They were embarking upon a journey. They didn't know what was going to happen next, but they stood up and they continued to walk. So that brings me to where we are today, still fighting the vestiges of racism especially when it comes to a variety of diseases that plague us most. But I want to salute mental health. It was difficult for us then to speak to our pain, to demonstrate our pain, because there was not much that could be done. And unfortunately, we may still be in that situation. So I want to salute their resilience for walking forward despite all odds.
Nikichi?
Okay, so I have to be very honest. I went to bed one night and then I woke up the next morning and we had a new federal holiday. I'm not quite sure that the masses were calling out for a new holiday. I do know that they were calling out for reparations. I do know that they were calling out for an end to police brutality. I do know that they were calling out for voting rights, but it is here now and I will do nothing more than rejoice. And I will rejoice because it's a historic remembrance of the everything that our ancestors went through, the trauma, the abuse, everything. And the one thing that I would say with respect to Juneteenth is that it is a further rededication to all of the ideals that we know we need to keep struggling for. We survived, as my sister said, we are surviving the pandemic of white supremacy. This new holiday is certainly not a vaccination against acts and systems of racism, but it is definitely a shot in the arm. So I just want to say that for those who suffered the unendurable, we will rejoice in knowing that we are continuing the struggle.
And how does this connect with your work at the Justice Roundtable and at the Taifa Group?
Well, actually, it connects quite perfectly with both. Justice Roundtable, I deal with issues of criminal justice reform. And as I said, the calling of this federal holiday must not negate everything that we need to be doing. It's not, we've checked this box and now we don't have to do anything else for accountability or anything else with respect to the Black community. With respect to the Taifa Group, I've been working day in and day out on the issue of reparations. It is not a situation where, okay, we've done something for Black people. Now we don't need to go the next step beyond the symbolic and really put some flesh and meat on the situation. It just redoubles the work that I am already doing. It redoubles it with the knowledge that we had a unanimous Senate voting for this. We had a near unanimous House, near unanimous voting for it. There is absolutely no reason why those same entities should not do the same for HR 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans.
Thank you. Aya, your thoughts?
Well, nothing changes in my neck of the woods in terms of our celebration of Juneteenth. I am, as always, inspired by the resilience of our people. When you think of Mama Opal, who fought for this for 40 years, or Al Edwards in my state of Texas, who advocated for Juneteenth to be recognized as a state holiday decades ago. And so Texas actually had its first celebration back in, if you call it that, back in 1980. So I am excited for and inspired by just the resiliency of our people and the fact that we don't stop. We just keep fighting for that freedom in every way. Am I particularly excited about this being a national holiday? No, because what I have seen time and time again through history is that whenever white people get their hands on something, like Marimba Ani would say, Urugu, they just suck the spirit out of it, and so it's going to be all the commercialization and all the other things, but this is the world that we live in. In terms of how this ties to the work that I do, I mean, the work continues. I am primarily focused on working with youth and women in my community. So whether it's as a life coach or with our African American history classes or our youth backyard gardening initiative, and we just spent 4 hours of back-breaking work there this morning, putting up a fence. So the deer didn't just come and have fun with the plants that we've been so diligently tending. Or whether it's through Black ladies Advancing Qualitative and Quantitative Change, of which I am a founding member. All of these entities, the work I do is to figure out how to address the needs of my people. In addition to that, I am also working with some others in Opobo, Nigeria, which is where my family originates from, to create a library. And so, God willing, by September, I will be back in Nigeria and we'll actually be putting that library up. We've got books and all kinds of donations that have come in. And so our work for freedom in every sense of the word continues. And that's what I am committed to with everything that I do on a daily basis.
Dr. Ellis?
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica, for having me. And it's great to be here with all you lovely ladies. Juneteenth in our process of reclaiming aspects of our history all the time, right? We're always in this process of reclamation. I've been celebrating Juneteenth, and many of us across the nation have been celebrating Juneteenth. So that was going to happen. We were happy about it. Our festivals were already set. We weren't waiting on anybody. But I have also noticed that with the announcement of the holiday, more people have begun to, more Black people even have begun to do research. They're Googling, what is Juneteenth? They're getting clarity, they're understanding the scope of our history. And thankfully, right? In order to have Juneteenth, you have to start off with the institution of slavery in America, which has not yet received its right attention and its just due, right? And so I like the fact that people are exploring these histories now, and I do think it's definitely inspired by the reparations movement. It's inspired by the fact that we had a wannabe dictator in office. It's inspired by the January 6th insurrection. It's inspired by the Georgia Senate runoff. It's inspired by the death of George Floyd. It's inspired by Black Lives Matter. It's inspired by all of our movements culminating together to end police brutality, to end economic injustice. And so, it's all coming together. And like Nkechi said, definitely when I particularly saw that the holiday was coming out of the Senate first and then supposed to trickle down to the House and then be announced, I said, oh no, they're up to something. They're up to something. What it means, honestly, is that let's snatch the holiday itself for all of our ancestors and for all of the work that we have done over the years. However, we need to, as a part of Juneteenth, do exactly what we're doing today and teach people and to stay vigilant, because something is coming. And I believe that something is the filibuster of the Senate version of HR 40. They don't intend to pass that. They are going to try to block that at every level. And how do I know that? Because when HR 40 was coming out of the Judiciary Committee, the vote was 25-17, right? 17, no, all Republicans. So the fact that we're concerned about, the Senate, it's so clear to me. So let's just stay vigilant. Also, how it relates to my work. I'm a public historian and I'm a storyteller, I'm an artist. How it also relates to my work is most of what I have done over the last, 20 something years has been to make the Tulsa story public. So I cannot tell you how it feels to know that Tulsa and the Tulsa Massacre and Greenwood is rolling off of everybody's tongue at this point, right? As a result of the people that are in Tulsa, many of whom did not even hear about Tulsa when I went down in 1998, okay? So it is a result of a handful of people in Tulsa who held on to the story and decided to share the story. It's a result of the Tulsa Race Riot Commission in Oklahoma. It's a result of our first reparations lawsuit that I worked on with Charles Ogletree, with Johnny Cochran, with Adjoa Ayatura, with Michelle Roberts, Dennis Sweet, Randall Robinson. I mean, the list goes on. And it's a result of the State of the Black World Conference that occurred in 2011. And it's a result of my campaign, which was the All Eyes on Tulsa campaign, and spread throughout the Black Radical Congress and then across the internet. So there's so much, and it's amazing to see how popular culture has played a role. A lot of people still hadn't even heard of Tulsa until Watchmen came out, and Watchmen came out on HBO, and people thought that it was just dramatic viewing. They did not know that it was a real thing. And then we have Lovecraft Country, right? And so I'm thankful. It's interesting, right? That of all the work that we have done, that a television show would in many ways trump what we were doing. But it's okay, because that awareness led to us furthering the gap, closing the gap on the real issues. And so I support in full the lawsuit that is coming out of Greenwood Rising, with Demario Solomon and that entire team. And I hope to actually be able to contribute in the future, because being on the first reparations team has been interesting. And I'm sure that you all know that Charles Ogletree, has Alzheimer's. And so it's interesting because I'm one of the few voices now that can represent what we did in that work. And so I'm happy to be here. There's a number of other things that I do, like serving food, like being the creator of Black Politics Matter and offering political analysis. And also I work on public parks and signs. And so that gives me the opportunity to be creative in my work. And I appreciate that. So I do appreciate Juneteenth. I'm also cautiously optimistic, and I'm also vigilant about the Senate and the House. They need to do what needs to be done to make things right for African Americans in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to Nicole.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful, wonderful. I want to separate out Juneteenth as a federal holiday and Juneteenth as the historical commemoration of our people's freedom. Because as I've been saying to people in the last 24 hours, we've been doing Juneteenth. The federal government just caught up to the rest of us. So I think it's really important for people to understand that we've been doing this and we've been celebrating our history and honoring our ancestors. And why I think it's important now is because finally the United States government has officially come out and said race matters, which is what we have been telling them for centuries, that race matters. And now they are finally admitting that it does. And I want us to use this as a leverage point. You heard Nkechi say earlier that yes, we have this holiday, and that's all well and good. I think it is a good thing. But we need them to do more than just give us a holiday. We had this before. If we go back to the last time we had a federal holiday put on the books, it was MLK Day, as we all know. And at that time, it was 1983. Ronald Reagan was the president. The unemployment rate for Black folks was sky high. The median income for Black folks in comparison to whites was extremely low. We were dealing with Reagan's efforts to paint our people as criminals, as welfare queens. So there was work to be done, even though he used a pen and he gave us that holiday. And my message to this Congress is do not repeat the mistakes of the past. Yes, we have this holiday, but Black folks are dying in the streets at the hand of white police officers. Our folks are suffering disparate health impacts as a result of COVID, as a result of us not having the healthcare systems in place that we need to take care of our families. We still have food deserts in our communities. We still have unhealthy drinking water. We still have schools that are not educating our children. And so to me, Juneteenth is a starting off point for us really pushing this government to be true to its promises. And its promises that were made to people when this country was founded is that we would have equality and justice for all. And so we have to demand that. And we have to tell them, you have now used the stroke of the pen, President Biden, to say this is important. Now show us through your actions. And for us at Human Rights Watch, why this is so important is for myriad reasons. One of the reasons I came to Human Rights Watch is because I wanted people to see that the issues around race were indeed human rights issues, as well as civil rights and social justice issues. There are people who said to me when I came to Human Rights Watch, well, now you're leaving your civil rights career behind. And I look at them like they're crazy when they say that to me. And I said, understand and know your history. Issues around race and justice are human rights issues. These two movements are inextricably linked. And so Juneteenth and what it represents and fighting for racial justice is really the grounding for the work in our US program at Human Rights Watch. our work on reparation, the work we are doing partnering with families and communities in Tulsa. We went to Tulsa when Terrence Crutcher was originally shot and killed in 2016 because we knew there was a problem with policing and how the white government there was treating the Black community. We have been working on issues around surveillance and surveillance of Black and Brown people because those are human rights violations. We work on immigration because we like to say and remind people loudly and clearly that immigration is about the full diaspora, that there are Black immigrant communities who are suffering, that there are Black immigrant communities who have to be represented. We work on issues around voting because we know that the biggest opportunity you have to express your voice in this country is through the ballot box. So for us, Juneteenth is what I like to call the connective tissue that brings all of these issues into perspective and grounds the work that we are doing at Human Rights Watch. As I said to my team when I came on board, everything we do is about race. And if it is not grounded in race, then we are not really doing the work of the US program. And so for us, that is our guiding force and our guiding principle. And it emanates in everything that we do and everything that we work on. And I tell my team, if when you bring a new project to me, if you can't tell me how this connects to race, then it's not something that we need to be doing. And I think that's actually the litmus test that our government needs to be putting forth. What are we doing when it comes to poverty and economic inequality? What are we doing when it comes to housing, when it comes to education? And if we are not grounding that in how it's going to deal with the ugly and racist history of this country, then we're not doing our job.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Very powerful. I wanted to start off this second question with Rosalind. I know you have to go soon, but how does your work support the overall well-being and health of Black communities?
We launched Black Health Matters in 2012, and the impetus for it was the advent of the Affordable Care Act. So I don't know about everyone's personal history, but I lost my grandparents too soon. I don't believe my grandparents lived to see the age of 70. And so by the time I remember I was a teenager, by the time my grandmother was admitted to the hospital, she probably didn't live another week. And I know that her death was overwhelmingly painful. There was no peace because, there was no such thing really as Black folks really going into hospice. And I remember thinking, well, if my parents knew better, they could have done better for my grandmother. If I had known better, I could have done better for her. But at that time, people were not challenging doctors to the degree that we feel that we can now. And people really just, people didn't want to present or talk about their illness. They basically suffered and then dropped dead. So then I felt that I would not want other families to have to experience that. When the ACA was passed, I was really excited because I felt that this was a great moment for African Americans in the sense that we would now have access to care. We could have a mammogram. We could have an osteoporosis screening. We could go see a doctor. It wouldn't have to cost us a fortune. We can search and find a program out there for every kind of budget. All of that is great. Access is great, but unless you have an understanding of what the fundamentals of health are, it doesn't matter how much access you have. Have you ever met people, they don't understand that they're supposed to have vegetables, they're supposed to have fruit, they're supposed to sleep at least 7 to 8 hours a day. You're supposed to manage your stress, good oral hygiene. All of these things will go a long way in helping you live a better and longer life. But unless you have a roadmap or a blueprint for that, access isn't going to help you. And so we launched Black Health Matters to be the North Star for thousands of African Americans who would embark upon their journey to better health. We launched with a website. And so we built a lot of content that was self-reflective, meaning we talk about elements of the diaspora, right? We talked about the foods that we ate. We talked about our lifestyle, and we promoted that. And then we went into social media because that's a great way to also amplify the content that was created. And what we found when we first started more than 8 years ago was that we would kind of plant ourselves in various social media groups, right? So Black women have a lot of conversations about natural hair online, a lot. We spend a lot of money on hair care products. So we would kind of creep into a social group on Facebook, and they would be talking about natural hair. And we'd be like, oh, if you ran and, you know, worked up your cardiovascular system, you'd have more blood flowing and it would help your heart. It could possibly help your hair. That was an angle. We were desperate, but we needed to get our name out there. And what we found was that people would report us to Facebook and Facebook would shut us down. So if you can imagine trying to launch a brand and not having a voice, because people were like, we don't want to read about that. What did they say? I ain't got time for all that. I just want to read about my hair. Fast forward to today, we can go into any chat room, any Facebook group with content that's relevant for that group, and it is accepted, liked, and shared. So we have been at the beginning kind of this evolution where we're now very conscious that Black health matters and that we need to be proactive and that we can advance our own health and that of our families. And that is the work of, that is my advocacy. We launched something about 2.5 years ago, which are the Black Health Matters Summits. And the idea with that is that we all understand that we love entertainment, right? Our culture has helped us to produce amazing entertainers, music, rhythm, art, culture. That's what we do, and we do it so incredibly well. So what we decided was that we were going to create symposia for the grassroots that would somewhat mirror we call it the BET Awards of Health, right? It's slick, it's well produced, it's information, but it's with clinicians that drop the mic. We call them the hardest working docs in the business. They have passion for what they do. So when I would go for conferences, you know, prior to launching the summits, I would just be amazed that some of these scientists could talk about a molecule and make you cry, the ones that are really involved and excited about it. If I could just share that level of excitement with the African-American community, they also might get hyped up about this and start to think about, well, if I've got cancer, I'm going to demand better care, or I'm going to ask about this molecule, or I'm going to seek better health, or we wanted to elevate rare diseases that impact our community. 1 in every 222 women that are African-American have lupus. What are we doing for them? Let's talk about sickle cell. So we created the summits to give oxygen to the disease states that just don't get any kind of play in general media. And our summits were successful. So we start from 8 o'clock in the morning, we go into 5, we cover 15 different types of sessions and chronic disease, everything from Alzheimer's to hATTR amyloidosis to a variety of different disease states. And we come together to build a culture of health and to destigmatize illness. We're also reaching out to brothers because we're tired of Black women being the chief medical officer of their families, right? Brothers need to step up, but they tend to be a little more stoic. So we are hosting our next event at the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and that's going to be on July 13th. All of our summits are always free and open to the public. And so we are going to dialogue on why Black men need to get involved in their own health, because 1 in 8 will have prostate cancer. It may not kill them, but 1 in 8 will have it. So they need to know what to do, where to go, and how to proceed. So we're looking to build, again, a community of health, a culture of health that spans across the diaspora.
Thank you so much. Aya, I would love to hear more about how your work also uplifts the well-being of Black communities. You're muted. You're still muted.
Thank you so much for this question and for this opportunity. You know, well-being is my thing. I'm a mother of 5. My foray into this actually started as a child watching my mother, who is a PhD in social work, who always had a farm. We always were able to just walk a few yards from the back door and harvest things and be able to cook them. And although I was born in this country, I was raised in Nigeria, and then I came back to the United States, and I just noticed the difference in food and the taste of food, and attributed it to the fact that we were no longer growing our own food, and we were getting all of these foods that were processed and God knows whatever else in them. And so at this point in my life, I started homeschooling my sons and decided to incorporate agriculture and learning how to grow our own things and taking care of our bodies into our curriculum. That took off, and through social media, other people started asking us, what are you doing? And so now in my community and beyond, there are over 60 people who have now created their own backyard gardens. And we frequently share stories, and people are excited about when they're able to go, get something and make their own meals. And we're really talking about what is food versus just what we purchase and we eat. Because the biggest medicine we all consume is the food that we take in. And with that, in the community that I live in, we also have an area that is a food desert. So I am part of 2 different initiatives where we are actively trying to get more people in the community to create gardens, and we have community gardens. One of them is particularly focused on teaching the youth. Because my children, for instance, I have a daughter who does not like to go into a garden, and she'll say, where does beans come from? That kind of thing. And she's never seen it grow. But now she gets to when she tries. She sees it in our yard. But at any rate, we have one that focuses on youth, and then another one where we have just had community members who donated land, or at least have given us land for free for a time period in areas that are highly trafficked, if you will. And we go there and we just start tilling the ground and building raised beds, and people in the community come out and they join in and they learn how to grow things, and the food is free for people to take with them as we harvest them. So in terms of well-being, particularly focusing on the issue of what we're feeding ourselves and what we consider food, and how relatively easy it is for all of us, no matter where we live, whether you're gardening in the ground or in containers, whether you live in a high rise or wherever, we can grow some of our own food, and we can change our relationship with food. I think that's extremely important as we talk about freedom, because we're literally eating ourselves to death in some of the choices that we're making, and some of the choices that we may feel forced upon us. In addition to that, I am a part of multiple groups, and with our mentoring group for girls, which is called Intelligent and Talented Girls, we have a big focus on mental health and just helping girls to understand themselves, understand their emotions. How do we resolve conflicts with all of the trauma, quite frankly, that many of our young girls are subject to? With all of the concern about sexual trafficking, which unfortunately, again, is huge in the area that I live in, just helping these young women to figure out how to be in their bodies, to process what they're feeling, to give them tools to address it, including self-defense tools, but also just teaching about meditation and breathing and being in tune with yourself. And so there are just a lot of things that we're trying to do to really highlight the importance of us taking our power back to be well mentally and to be well physically. So those are some of the things that we're doing.
Thank you. And I would love to hear more on this from you, Dr. Page, because I also think there's a cultural aspect to our well-being, a cultural, historical aspect. So I'd love to know more about the work at African Ancestry and how it connects to our overall well-being as well.
I was going to say, and piggybacking off of what Aya said, definitely the work that African Ancestry does in reconnecting people to their African country and ethnic group of origin is identity work. It's very basic identity work. And I say it every time I can, that as Black people, we are the original victims of identity theft. We don't know who we are. And so by reconnecting to the place that your maternal ancestor came from, the woman whose blood is literally running through your veins right now, you then are open to understanding the traditions and the values and the cultural practices and the spiritual practices that have informed your family, and you're not even aware of it. And this is the challenge, is that we don't even know that we don't know who we are. The system of slavery was outstanding at disconnecting us. And then everything that the system of white supremacy has been flawless in conditioning many of us to think the worst of ourselves. But when you know where you're from, then you know who you are. And that provides a root system. Going back to Aya's talking about gardening, I am definitely no gardener, but I know that the roots run deep. And so when you establish those roots, when the wind comes, when the weather comes, when all these negative forces that are constantly around us, as everyone on the panel has said already, we can still stand tall. We don't have to wonder who we are. We don't have to question ourselves, and we can be resolute in our charge to live up to the call to action that every single person has talked about before me today on the panel. So I see our work as critical to the psychological well-being of Black people around the world. And, you know, it happens at a very high level, but then it comes down to, you know, a very personal level within your family and within the communities that you interact with. I'm very proud of this work, and we've seen this impact. You talk about the cultural element of it. We just came back from Sierra Leone, where 59 people received citizenship because they are the descendants of the people of Sierra Leone. There are communities who have been in Sierra Leone for generations from other countries, other parts of the world. They can't get citizenship. It's a part of the Constitution, but because we are, well, not me, but because these 59 are the genetic descendants of Sierra Leone, the president personally told them, "You are home. We see you. We see George Floyd. We see Breonna Taylor. We see Ahmaud Arbery, and you have a place here." And that to me is the best, the best medicine, knowing that there's some place for you to go, some community that you can engage in outside of the United States, should you want to, and feel free.
Thank you so much. Nkechi, activism is also healing too. So in what ways does your work at the Taifa Group and as a convener of the Justice Roundtable uplift the well-being of Black communities?
Well, Jam, I've been an activist and an advocate ever since I was a teenager, ever since I was selling Black Panther Party papers on the streets of Washington, D.C., ever since I opened up that newspaper and saw point number 3 talking about we want an end to the robbery of the capitalists of our Black community, and it was talking about 40 acres and a mule and reparations. This was, 16 years old, and I've been rocking and rolling ever since. I am a founding member, a proud founding member of NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, which I feel ushered in what I call the modern era reparations movement on the heels, on the shoulders of people like Queen Mother Audley Moore, who was back then during the Garvey movement and was involved in every single reparations movement until her death. I sat at the feet of pioneers such as Imari Abubakar Obadeli and Chokwe Lumumba and Dorothy Lewis and others who were talking about the issue of reparations long before NCOBRA was even founded. Its roots came from the activist Black nationalist, Pan-Africanist community, and I was all up in there, part of that. I will credit the National Conference of Black Lawyers as being an entity that really helped to mainstream the reparations movement, because they called for a conference at Harvard in '87. And the question at that conference was, do we need a constitutional amendment to effectuate reparations? And the panelists were Imari Obadeli of the Republic of New Africa, Chokwe Lumumba of the Republic of New Africa in the Malcolm X grassroots movement, and myself, I was with the Republic of New Africa as well. And NCOBRA had not been born, but we decided, the three of us, that you did not need a constitutional amendment because it already was there within the whole internal thing of just what Juneteenth was all about. Our freedom was already there. Our freedom was already recognized. all that was needed in the Constitution was the second section of the 13th Amendment, that it would, Congress would have the power to bring into effect, this freedom. And that power should be through HR 40. So the nationalists, the activist community called together a convening of all the reparations loving activists and advocates at that time. And out of that convening in September 1987 was born NCOBA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And when we talk about healing, everything I feel can fall within that reparations rubric. I mean, it's a good thing that there are all these equity executive orders across disciplines and all, but all that is part of reparations. Within NCOBA, within our Legal Strategies Commission, we came up with 5 injury areas to be addressed. Peoplehood, nationhood. Gina Page was talking about, our ancestry. Marcus Garvey was talking about repatriation. Republic of New Africa was talking about an independent nationhood. Our nationhood, our peoplehood was snatched from us, and it needs to be repaired. And that's one of the injury areas. Health is one of the injury areas. I just recently learned about this whole concept of transgenerational epigenetic inheritance, that trauma from the enslavement era and beyond, the lynchings and the Black codes and the peonage system and the sharecropping and the not being able to get the benefits of the Homestead Act or the GI Bill, the massacres of whole towns, Dr. Goddess, and Kimberly, seeing you turning on the TV and seeing you up there, testifying about Tulsa, as part of all of this that came out, and, as a, result. And, all of that traveled within our genes. The psychiatrists did researcher studies of second and third generation Holocaust survivors, and they found that impact of the Holocaust traveled in their genes. And then we're thinking about, well, we got 400 years. Okay, just what is the benefit? What is the cost? What is the redress for that? So you have peoplehood, nationhood, you have health, we have wealth. We talk about the wealth, black-white wealth gap. We talk about the criminal punishment system, another injury area, and we talk about education. And I just want to say this about education. All this is going on now, talking about, can't talk about critical race theory in school, can't talk about something because it's going to make some other group feel bad. I mean, my goodness, if a Black child can experience racism, then a white child can learn about racism. I mean, back in 1983, when the Martin Luther King bill was first passed in 83, I published my first book, Shining Legacy, Story Poems and Tales for the Young, so Black heroes forever will be sung. In 92, I published another book for young people, The Adventures of Kojo and Amma, an Afrocentric primer for young readers. And both of those books and another one are going to be coming out again this summer because it is time. We have a new generation now that need to know about our heroes and heroines. And back in 83, there were not educational resources like that out there. There weren't those that celebrated the freedom fighters such as Denmark Vesey and Josephine Q and Toussaint Louverture and Harriet Tubman and Fannie Lou Hamer and Paul Robeson and Marcus Garvey. These were not in the history books, not even for adults, but definitely not for youth. And I celebrated all that within my books. And now they talking about making that illegal. The same people who voted unanimously for Juneteenth. You really gotta wonder, is there another ulterior motive behind making it a federal holiday? As Focus said, we've always been celebrating Juneteenth. I mean, it's really good now that a larger amount of the population now knows about it, absolutely, unquestionably. But I just hope that we don't fall victim to any kind of joogie boogie that the federal government might have going on. So just to conclude, I wanna say, just today, Juneteenth, okay, I launched a TV series called the Black Power Hour on Black on Purpose TV. That's BOPTV.com. It's a streaming service. And the theme of today's launch program was none other than reparations. Interviewed Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, interviewed Alderman Robin Rue Simmons, who was the alderman person who engineered the very creative idea of using tax revenue from the city's legal cannabis industry to fund reparations initiatives. I had a panel of some of the top reparations advocates in the country, ranging from Dr. Julian Malveaux, economist, Dr. Ivor Carruthers of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, Brother Ron Daniels, Institute of the 21st century, yeah, Black World 21st Century, Brother Mark Thompson Mazzamella of host of Make It Plain, talking about these issues. And that's just the first show. So stay tuned, BOPTV.com, go on and subscribe and be part of the Black Power Hour. And be on the lookout for my books for young people that are going to hit the streets again after almost, God dang, I am that old, after almost 40 years of from when they were first put in. And of course, my memoir that's out there now that was published last year, Black Power, Black Lawyer, My Audacious Quest for Justice. Back to you, Jam.
Thank you. Nicole, same question, activism and how it aligns with our overall well-being.
First, let me say, you know how they used to say Tom Joyner was the hardest working man in radio? Nikiki is the hardest working woman in Black activism. She just is. And I am so honored to work with Nikiki on a pretty much daily basis. And I'm still awed by all of the things she does. And I'm grateful for her mentorship always. I'm one of those people who, from the time I was 13 years old, knew I wanted to be a civil and human rights lawyer. And I knew that because I learned at that age the power of lawyers and what lawyers could do. You know, there are some people who say, oh, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer when I was a kid because I used to watch the old TV show Perry Mason, or I used to watch LA Law, depending on your age range and what generation you're in. And I tell people, well, I knew I wanted to become a lawyer because I was a PK, a project kid. And I grew up in public housing, and I grew up in a strong, loving, just phenomenal community. And that's what it was to me through my eyes. But then I learned as I got older that other people on the outside didn't see it that way, that they made assumptions about us because we were Black and brown kids who lived in public housing. We were less than, we were never going to amount to anything. Our parents weren't hardworking people. And that was not my reality. My mother had a government job. She was just a single mother, which meant she could qualify for public housing. We had flower planting day in my community. We left on Saturday to do our shopping with the doors and windows open. And we came back home, and that's the same condition we found our homes in. So when I would hear these counter narratives coming from people on the outside, it confused me. And more than anything, it made me angry. And I had a wonderful English teacher in 8th grade, Miss John, whom I'm still friends with to this day. And Miss John helped me to see that I was very passionate about social injustice. And I was still young enough that I couldn't necessarily put a name to it. I just knew that it was wrong. And I knew I wanted to do something about it. And that's how I wanted to spend my life. And she helped to turn a light bulb on in my head that helped me to see that being a lawyer for social change is a way I can have an impact and make a difference. And so that has been my guiding force throughout. So all of the work that I have done, from the time I went to the only law school in the country, Howard University School of Law, to then working at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, to then going to a civil rights law firm where I did employment discrimination based on race and gender, to then going to the Brennan Center for Justice, where I worked on issues around democracy, to then coming to Human Rights Watch. All of those things have been about using my lawyering skills and all of the opportunities that come from being a social justice engineer to have an impact and to make a difference. And, you know, I tell people all the time that if you are not figuring out how you can frame your work in such a way that you are helping to make Black and brown lives better, then you need to reevaluate how you're using your time and what you're doing. And these are for the people who say they want to have an impact from a social justice perspective. So that is the guiding force for our work. It has to be work that is impactful. And you know, that's one of the themes that I hear recurring in our conversation today as we talk about this federal holiday. It's mostly a symbolic gesture. And I don't say that to denigrate its importance. But at the end of the day, it is not saving lives. At the end of the day, it is not creating jobs for Black people. At the end of the day, it is not putting Black families on a better economic footing in comparison to white people and other groups. And so we have to always be focused on what is the impact of what we are doing. And that means from the cases that you take, to the community activism you get engaged in, to the partnerships and coalitions that you are building, that has to be the question that is always the guiding force. And so that's how I like to think about my work. That's how I think about the work that we are doing at Human Rights Watch. And lastly, I want to say this. You know, for me, it also has to be about speaking your truth always, always. You know, I remember that when I got out of law school, when I was getting out of law school, I had an opportunity to work for the ACLU. And it was to get a fellowship, a national fellowship with them. And during the interview, I was one of the finalists. And during the interview, I had a question from the panel. And this was one of those fellowships that was endowed by a family. So members of this family were sitting around the table and were part of the panel. And the question they posed to me is, Nicole, what would you think about a public housing community where there was going to be a push to get cameras installed in that community? Now, I'm not dumb. I knew what the ACLU wanted to hear. I knew what that family wanted to hear. They wanted to hear that that was an invasion of privacy and that there shouldn't be cameras in that community. I don't know if they read my resume and my essay. I was kind of thinking they hadn't, because then I had to remind them that I grew up in public housing. And I said, I know the ACLU thinks that that's an invasion of privacy. I said, but what matters is, what do the people in that community want for themselves? What do they feel is going to empower them to keep their communities safe and to keep their children safe? I said, now I personally might have a problem with those cameras. I said, but if the people in that community feel like they want cameras, that should be what they have. And I didn't get that fellowship, to no surprise. And I knew that as soon as I gave that answer. But I knew that I spoke my truth. And my truth in doing this work is always about, what do the people want? So that's whether I've been litigating, that's whether I've been an advocate on Capitol Hill, that's whether I'm going before the UN on behalf of Human Rights Watch. What has to be at the forefront is not what I want and what I think. My role is to be a vehicle so that our people who don't have opportunities to be on lovely panels like this, who don't have an opportunity to sit in front of a congressional panel in a House Judiciary Committee room and speak for themselves, our role is to speak the truth, and so that they can have an opportunity to be heard and have their voices uplifted. And that's the guiding principle for me in doing this work. And that's the way I think we can have the greatest impact, is thinking about and trying to make sure that we are upholding the voices of the individuals that we work every day to try to empower and assist.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ellis, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how history and culture uplifts the overall well-being of Black communities.
Sure. Thank you again, Jam. You know, I was thinking about this because I had a fourth grade teacher named Mrs. Viola Burgess, and we had a full Black history course with a Black history textbook with glossary terms and stories and comprehension and exams. And then in my school, it was at St. Benedict the More, right? I grew into the understanding of that as well. The fourth grade was responsible for putting on the Black history plays. And so it's just interesting because Mrs. Burgess's work, it served as the groundwork for what, like literally everything that I do now, between history and the arts and education and public education, right? And so we're friends to this day as well. So we need to have another panel about those of us who are friends with our childhood teachers, because they were fantastic. And so that, I'm sure that laid the groundwork for me to enter into Africana studies, right? And I'm a recipient of the hard work of those in the Black Power movement that created Black studies for me, right? And so I ended up going to a program that was created by a Black woman, Dr. Dolores Aldrich. And I went on to be in this program and actually worked as a double major in English and Africana studies, because I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I was also one of those people that watched LA Law, and I just knew that was going to be me. And so did everybody else, because they were like, she likes to argue, she likes to fight. You know, I was like, I've always been a warrior. But then I was introduced to this concept of graduate school. And so I was swayed in that way. A lot of my work, well, let me back up. Africana studies as a basis, right? Our motto is academic excellence and social responsibility. That is what I learned from the very beginning, even from Mrs. Burgess in the fourth grade, when we didn't have that motto per se, but we did have ideas around excellence and intelligence and asserting oneself. And so when I think about academic excellence, right, you have to, like, facts matter. And we're seeing today, right, that our outward enemies, quite frankly, they're trying to make us revise what we saw with our own eyes on January 6th, right? They're trying to tell us the white officer, Brian Sicknick, died of natural causes after he was rustled and hustled about and abused in the public, and then, you know, went back to his office and couldn't breathe. Suddenly he died of natural causes. We're being encouraged to lessen the impact of what we saw on January 6th. We have people who are major anti-vaxxers, right? And this is even after black doctors told us what the challenges were, but also told us that the risk to take it is more important than losing your life over it, because we were the ones that were disproportionately affected. And I'm not a doctor, I was just listening to them, right? But to have a whole panel of doctors who do know about the Tuskegee experiment, who do know about medical apartheid, and will still take all of that information and acknowledge that, you know, there's a Nigerian who helped to make, you know, the vaccine, and to say, you know, you all, we really need to do this, right? We have a lot of battles in our community. We have a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of mythology in our community. We believe in conspiracy theories a lot. And so honestly, it is our job to tell people the facts. I can't stress that enough, right? And I do see a decrease in what has been happening in departments of Africana studies. And I think it's because they've been underfunded. They have been attacked in many ways. I see this across the board. So in the field of Africana studies, what I'm feeling in the public now, especially because when I got on Twitter as Dr. Goddess, which is my artist name. And I was like, oh, I'm promoting my art. You know, I have a one-woman show and I want to do this. And my one-woman show definitely is basically just a Black studies book placed on stage. But I thought that I was doing that. And then while I was on Twitter, I realized that more and more people wanted the historical information that I had. They wanted me to share more and more stories and facts about our community and Black history and how it relates to today. And so I found myself teaching more and more and more on Twitter. And I was already, merging into being a public intellectual because, again, my dissertation was on the Tulsa Massacre, the destruction of Black Wall Street. And that immediately swept me into my role as a public historian, my role as a public intellectual. And so then there's my birthright and my relative, because I am August Wilson's maternal niece. And so I grew up on his plays ever since I was 10 years old. And I went to all but one of the Broadway openings, and I went to most of the regional openings that were around the country. If they were in Chicago, if they were in Pittsburgh, if they were in Atlanta, if they were in St. Louis, I was there. And that gave me an entire other curriculum, right? That was definitely historically rooted, but artistically defined. And so this idea that I could wrestle with the facts of our history, as well as cultivate an imaginative story that would help to inspire our people first and foremost. And if it inspired everybody else, that's great, right? The fact that I was given that playbook, and the fact that I could do that is literally a part of the work that I have been doing all along. And so, everybody knows that Ma Rainey's Black Bottom came out, on Netflix. If you haven't watched it, you definitely want to watch Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. It's actually a blues story, very much about the blues and being on the cusp of moving into the jazz era. And as you all know, it was the last film that Chadwick Boseman made. But, and on Juneteenth, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is so instructive, right? It's so instructive. Why was Levy so caught up in his anger? Did he have a righteous hostility towards him? Why did he end up committing committing an act of murder? I'm giving away the plot, I'm sorry, but it has been out for months now. But why would he engage in an act of murder over something as small as someone stepping on his shoes? Because it's not about stepping on somebody's shoes, right? It's the whole history. And as we saw in his monologue, it goes all the way back to the 1800s, where you have his father owned 50 acres of land, right? More than the 40 acres that we were due. He owned 50 acres of land. He was considered an uppity Negro. His wife was attacked while he was gone and went to town to get his goods, and it would take it more than a day. And while he was gone, they gang raped his wife to put him back in his place, right? All of these stories they're historically rooted, and they're creatively told. And then you have Levy, who tries to kill one of these white men, and they slash him with a knife. He's bleeding profusely. And when they take him to the white doctor says, "I don't have time to see you. I have a calf that is being born." And so then he's taken to the midwife, Miss Etta, who sewed him up and made him whole. So his entire inheritance was robbed from him. It was taken from him. And isn't that our story over and over and over again? What I'm finding is that the initial intent of Africana studies is being thwarted by, there's a renewal of our quest for information, but there's a gap, you all. There's a gap between what young people actually know to be fact versus what our scholarly tradition has provided us. So the fact that we're doing this today, the fact that Nkechi, is doing the streaming, right? The fact that we are all out here doing things in popular culture is extremely important, because this violence, right? This untenable violence, and even the way that we're dealing with oppression, it's complicated. It's destructive, in many ways. Like, we're really suffering in our communities. And we know that it's state-sanctioned violence. We know where it comes from, but what we are missing more today is the counter to it. I grew up countering white supremacy. Like, I knew that it existed, right? It was a thing, but it was like, we were countering it. We were countering it by what we learned. We were fierce students because we knew we needed that information to fight. We were principled in our behavior because we knew that what is better than loving one another, right? That no matter how much you know, if you're not kind to somebody, if you don't have love, then what is it? You're a clanging cymbal, right? So it's not just the awareness of our condition that is enough. No, it's the application of it, to ourselves and each other. So I'm just, there's a lot here, but I'm confident that the interest that young people have in our history, and we see it across social media, we see it. But what is also happening is that we need to put out the correct information for the public. And honestly, I need for all of my Africana Studies scholars, all of my colleagues, I need us to move forward and entering into the public sphere. I'm seeing the deficit that was caused because Africana Studies started on the college level, right? And so even though I feel very blessed, to have gotten an education, in Africana Studies and English, I realized that Mrs. Burgess's work in the 4th grade is what really shifted my consciousness. And I grew up in Pittsburgh, right? And so Pittsburgh, because of the activists here, they set up Pittsburgh as a sister city to South Africa, to Johannesburg. So I grew up, I remember when I was 13 years old, and we were told, okay, what contribution are you going to make to help liberate the people of South Africa? And as young people, we decided we have to stop buying Coca-Cola clothes. That was the thing. It was like to have Coca-Cola clothes, it meant so much. And those elders connected the dots for me that what I was buying with these Coca-Cola clothes was supporting the suppression in South Africa. So even at 13, it was a small thing to do, but I just said, oh, okay, I'm just not going to buy those clothes anymore, And I remember also coming into college, also other elders, other activists, because I didn't connect these dots. I just kind of took their word for it and I did it. And I'm so proud that I did. They said, don't buy Shell oil. Don't go to the gas station and buy Shell oil, because what is happening in Nigeria is a shame, it's oppressive, and the United States is complicit, and we cannot be complicit. So I did not, it took me years to learn the complexities of what was happening in Nigeria. However, my small contribution was that I bypassed that Shell oil, and I think I'm still boycotting. I rarely go to Shell oil, right? It was just ingrained in me. So those types of things I think we're seeing. And then lastly, I want to say that one of the reasons why I'm pushing us to really enter this public sphere even more is that I'm weary about the YouTube University people that
wait a minute, Dr. Ellen.
Sure.
You're going into the next question now.
Okay, no problem. I'll wait on that.
Okay.
But so,
all right, so that's, you're on time.
Okay, good.
All right. So yeah, we're getting right there now. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you all, because you all work in different spaces of activism, but we coexist in these spaces. One of the core things that we try to address at NBCI Trust is what Dr. Ellis brought up, the vacuum and the issues that are happening right now with misinformation. And we refer to it as cultural misinformation because a lot of it attaches itself to like real cultural stories or issues, but then infuses false narratives or misinformation into these things, and they affect our communities. So I wanted to ask each of you, what are some common misconceptions that you encounter in your work, and what are you doing to help counter them? I do want to start with Dr. Page, because I see a lot of stuff right now around African heritage and identity with a lot of misinformation around that. And so I would love to know, like, what have you encountered and how have you all at African Ancestry tackled that?
That's a big question. Where I want to start is I want to start on the genetic literacy side. So when we started African Ancestry, we understood that in 2003, the genetic literacy of our community was pretty low. The only thing we knew about DNA was Tuskegee. I think that was even before Henrietta Lacks, the popularization of that, or that DNA exonerated someone who'd been on death row. It's very limited, and people, we just were ignorant. And so we've encountered a lot of ignorance around how DNA can be used, what people do with your DNA. And we've been able to counter that by being very clear that at African Ancestry, we don't sell or share our customers' personal or genetic information. That at African, we would get stuff like, I'm not doing this because I don't want you to clone me. You know, so it's even that kind of thing, like we don't want to clone you either. But, you know, taking a test doesn't mean you're going to get cloned. So we've done a lot over the past 18 years to help increase the genetic literacy of Black folks. When you talk about African history, let's just even talk about whether or not we're from Africa. How about that? People, as people of African descent, you don't know how many times I've heard, well, I'm not from Africa, so I don't need to take that test. So helping to dispel the negative stereotypes around what it means to be African or to be from Africa. And then on the other side, right, dispelling the negative stereotypes of what it means to be African American, because there's misinformation on both sides of this bridge that we have formed. And then, of course, even I just want to keep it real basic. People don't even know African countries. If you ask people to name an African country, you might get South Africa. A little kid's going to say Madagascar, but that's it. And when you ask what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word Africa, you hear disease and corruption and poverty and kids that look like me who are starving. And so just by opening up people's awareness that Africa has over 50 countries and that Africa has thousands of ethnic groups and languages and traditions and all of that has been, I think, our contribution, one of our contributions to educating and dispelling negative stereotypes and cultural misinformation. And then, you know, we get into today where genetic ancestry testing is so pervasive and it's almost like a commodity now. You can buy a test for $29 and with the belief that you're going to find out where in Africa you're from, which is a farce. And just helping our community to better understand the limitations of the different types of tests, the limitation, including our tests, you know, what we can and cannot tell you has been a very important focus for us. But yeah, there's so much, we can't do it alone. When you talk about the cultural misinformation, we rely on the whole community for that, because it's just rampant. It's just you got to stay focused, and you got to stay. We talked about these things around Juneteenth. Every day we're resilient, you know, in the work that each of us does. The amount of misinformation and negative criticism and all of that we have to face could seem unfathomable, but we do it, and we do it well because we are connected to our ancestors and we are rooted and we know who we are. And so I keep coming back to that, but for me, that's what it's all about.
Thank you. Nicole, I would love to hear about some common misconceptions you come across in your work.
Well, you know, I shared one of the biggest ones earlier in the conversation, which is that the issues we're dealing with here in the United States are not human rights issues. That's one of the biggest misconceptions. And, you know, one of the things that I am striving to do is to really make closer connections between the traditional civil rights community and the human rights community. Because so many people think that historically in the United States, that issues around racial justice are grounded in civil rights, and that is the realm through which they need to be handled. And that's very limiting. And I think that we are going to continue to be limited in how impactful we can be if we continue to look at how we need to handle this work through that limited lens. So trying to close the gap between human and civil rights is one of the big things that I'm working to do. And I think it's a huge misconception. That's one. Number two, I think it's also a big misconception that people, when they think about human rights issues, they don't think about Black folk. I can't tell you how many times people will say to me, well, I know, Human Rights Watch, you all are doing work in Europe and you're doing work in the Middle East. And I say, we have an Africa division and it's a huge division. And folks need to understand that issues around human rights are issues that gravely impact Black and brown people throughout the world, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. So that's one of the other big misconceptions. And I think the third one is this, that in order to really, bring about change, that we have to keep trying to work through the systems that have existed historically. And I think the biggest charge we have in front of us now is to break down these systems. I said to my husband is a civil rights attorney too. So, we talk about these issues all the time. And one of the things that I said to him, I said, sometimes it feels like doing this work is like trying to put, a square peg through a round hole. We keep trying to bring about change by using the systems that have existed, but we have to remember all of those systems were based on white supremacy. And all of those systems were based on building a nation that was not for and about Black and brown people. It was about building a nation for white male landowners. That's what this country stemmed from. And so we have to be really aggressive about creating new systems and not allow sometimes what I like to call that chatter to dissuade us. I am in discussions all the time with funders from my organization or board members who, when I start talking about defund the police, they get a little nervous. As my husband likes to say, they're gonna keep asking themselves, why did we hire this project girl? But I'm there to remind them why. We have to push back even when it is uncomfortable. And I know that's not a message for anybody on this panel, but we have to encourage the other folks that we work with to keep pushing back even when it's uncomfortable, and to remember that we have to break down these systems, that the systems that currently exist cannot simply be tweaked and edited and then we have the expectation that we're going to get and accomplish the freedom that we are all seeking. We really have to change the way business is done in this nation. And it's a misconception to think that we can get freedom through any other means and through other mechanisms.
Thank you so much. Aya, what are some misconceptions that you come across and how do you counter them?
Again, it's just been amazing listening to this panel and just the work that you all are doing. And I'm thinking it would have been great to be 19 or 20 years old at this point and just saying, hey, can I come intern with you and sit at your feet and learn? This is so amazing. Thank you, ladies, for all that you are doing out here in this world to make us truly free. So back to your question, Jam, some misconceptions. The biggest one I face is actually, I've been self-employed, 20 some years now. And so people just always assume that I have this big, huge organization with really deep pockets behind me and unlimited access to all kinds of resources. So the biggest issue I think I face is people expressing disappointment. We emailed you, or we reached out to you, or this happened to my son, or this happened here, and you didn't show. And it's like, whoa. So I like to tell people now, I'm not 911, and I really don't encourage you calling 911 unless you absolutely feel you have no other options. And I'm not God. And so, there are going to be times that you face issues and there are other entities and other people around you. And if there aren't, then it's time for you to join organizations and to actively work towards creating a village so that we never have to go through anything alone. And so there's just this concept that I think for some of us who are activists or really involved in our communities, that you just have unlimited time and unlimited resources to meet everybody's needs. And people very rarely ask me, well, how are you doing? How are you running a business and doing all of this work in the community? And you have a husband and you have 5 children. I have parents and I have, nieces and nephews, and I've got all these other roles. And so that's the biggest one. And people just getting, disappointed because they did not get what they wanted when they wanted it. I would say is probably the biggest misconception. And then the other part for me is also the assumption, and Nicole, I think spoke to this, not I think, Nicole absolutely spoke to this, is this idea that we can't be original in our problem solving. And all we're trying to do is to fit this square peg in a round hole. And so there are entities, including people who look like me, who sometimes want to work with me. And then once they realize that I'm not trying to just integrate, I'm not just trying to be the one Black person that you hire to check a box and say, hey, look, all we're doing for you people, I will not be that Black person you trot out. Then all of a sudden it's like, this one is too hot to handle. Not sure if I want to go with this one. And just getting our people to a place where even, let me give this story real quickly. I just dropped my parents off at the airport yesterday. Thankfully, they got vaccinated. They were able to fly from Nigeria here, which is their annual pilgrimage, and that I'm so grateful for because I get to enjoy them and so do my children. But I was talking to my parents about issues impacting Nigeria, and really Nigeria is on the verge of another civil war. And explaining to them, maybe they should have been explaining to me, but explaining to them that I really feel that a lot of our issues in Nigeria and on the continent and in the diaspora as a whole are rooted in the fact that even after we supposedly got freed, whether it's Juneteenth, whether it's Emancipation Proclamation, whether it's Nigerian Independence Day, Ghanaian Independence Day, Haiti, whatever it is, that the shackles stayed on mentally. And we continue to think, the way they do things, this is the pathway to progress. This is what civilization looks like. And we forgot what we had. And I was telling my parents, I said, imagine that we had communities with no jails, with no orphanages, with no mental institutions, with no old people's homes. And all of those people existed. It's not like we killed them, right? How did we do that? And how is that not seen as what we should go back to and pull from, as opposed to looking at America, for instance, United States of America, as this is the big shiny star that we should all be following. And I look at the incarceration rates of African-American people, or just people in general. What is it? 20% of the world's incarcerated are here in the United States of America. Insanity. And so getting back to your question, these misconceptions is just, thinking that it's about retooling what exists already, as opposed to reimagining something that may be completely different from what we were forced and brought into. And that I get a lot of pushback about that, but I'm going to stay on this path because I think that's the path to our freedom.
Thank you, Nikichi. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too.
Yeah, thank you. It's been just exhilarating just listening to everyone. There are 2 misconceptions that I want to speak to. The first one, I got to go back to reparations. Okay. It's like people don't really believe that this is something we should be doing, that we are really owed this. People don't really understand that there were, in fact, reparations paid. There were reparations paid at the end of the enslavement era. They just weren't paid to us. They were paid to the former slave owners. It started with the Compensated Emancipation Act, where when DC enslaved people were free, the slave owners got money for us. In Haiti, my goodness, they had to pay reparations to France for their own freedom. I'm just saying, it's not like the countries don't understand that this is what is owed. They know. They've done it. They just haven't done it for us. And even when The stark example is right there in their face. In our lifetime, in 1988, the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which granted $20,000 to each Japanese American detention camp survivor, a trust fund to be used to educate Americans about their sufferings during World War II, a formal apology from the United States, and a pardon for all those who resisted detention camp internment. I keep talking about that pardon because we have people who resisted this war of genocide that's been waged against our people. We have people who are in exile, okay? We have people who are languishing in prison from the COINTELPRO era. Yes, there is precedent in our lifetime that can be a legitimate part of a reparations claim. This needs to be part of the educational process. And when I speak of genocide, this is the second thing I wanted to speak to. You see, JM, introduced me as an activist, an advocate, which I am. But the reason why I went to law school was to have these issues that I was talking about and raising up as an activist to be able to be taken just a little bit more seriously. For the issue of reparations to come from the fringes to get to the mainstream, taken just a little bit more seriously. Unfortunately, it took 40 years for reparation for that to happen, for it to hit the mainstream. But it is here, smack in our face right now. And the thing that I wanted to raise is that we seem to think, it's just, we have no problem talking about the issue of genocide when we're talking about the native peoples of this country, when we're talking about the Jews and the Holocaust. There's no problem. But whenever it comes to us, there's always some type of disclaimer or qualification put on it. And it's because of the misconceptions. Folk don't realize, and I don't quite understand why even the legal community doesn't realize this. But when you look at the international definition of genocide, which has been codified in the US Code as part of US law, you will see that everything that we have been talking about here today fits within that definition. Genocide is not just the mass killing off of a people. It is that, yes. But the international definition, which has been also adopted by the United States, it is the intent to kill or destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such, number one, killing members of the group. Number two, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Number three, deliberately inflicting upon the group conditions of life calculated to bring about their destruction in whole or in part. People, do you hear what I'm saying? Okay, I did a white paper. I'll call it a big black and green paper. It was a white paper for the American Constitution Society that laid all of this out. Would they have published my paper if I didn't have that JD, that attorney at law behind my name? I don't think so. But they did. And it is the reason why I went to law school, to have those initials behind that name. Number four, what is that? Number four, causing births, whatever, denial or whatever of not allowing births within the group. And when you look at mass incarceration and you look at people being in their prime childbearing years, and you think about all of the births that's not happening as a result, when you see that women are the fastest growing demographic population in the prison system, I think that could fit into that definition as well. And number five, transferring children from one group to another. There's a whole stuff that can go. I really focused on the first three, but the second two can fit as well. And when you look at it in that, first of all, it took 38 years for the US Senate to ratify the Genocide Convention. Why? Because rightfully they felt that Black folk could use that convention to their benefit. But then what it is, they said, well, We passed these civil rights laws and this and that, and we're not going to tell people about this, that this is in the law. So they won't know about it. And so they're not going to use it. So I'm saying we need to open up that coffin, okay? We need to start looking at these principles. We need to start using them. We need to start analyzing and seeing the direct connection between the health disparities and the educational disparities and the wealth disparities and the peoplehood, nationhood, disparities, the mass incarceration, all that. And it all fits within the definition of genocide. And it goes on to say that genocide is not the only actionable act. It says conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, and complicity in its commission. And the definition goes on that says those guilty of genocide shall be punished, shall be, regardless of whether they are constitutionally protected rulers, public officials, or private citizens. I'm saying it's all there. Juneteenth, reparations, genocide, it's all there. But the misconceptions, we don't look at it as all of these things rightfully applying to us. The last thing with respect to that, they realized what they did. See, genocide was the first international treaty that was ratified. I might be wrong, but something along those lines. But all the ones that came after it, Convention Against Torture, Civil and Political Rights, Race Convention, they made qualifications. They said, we're not going to make that mistake we made with genocide. But they think it wasn't really a mistake because nobody really knows this is what we did. But with all these other conventions, they require implementing legislation. They have various limitations, reservations, and understandings limiting their impact in USR, y'all. But the Genocide Convention came with it with implementing legislation. So that's all I just want to say. We need to start being comfortable using these international terms that Nicole Austin Hillary knows all about, because Human Rights Watch is one of the progenitors of many of these concepts. We need to start using them and applying them to our situation right here in this country.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Ellis, you got us going on the whole misconceptions, misinformation. So after you, and we are ending at 4:45, so we're cognizant of time. After you, we'll go into our closing remarks. We had a lot more questions, but I feel like all you all's storytelling and advocacy and answers have answered most of them without me even having to ask the questions. So I know what some of the stuff you've been working on, Dr. Ellis, but I'd love for you to be sharing it with folks on how you help to clear up some cultural misinformation and misconceptions.
Sure. I mean, so one of the things is simply that that we are African people. I know that it seems so far-fetched, to say that, but I think it's really important for us to understand and for us to teach, right, that we are African people and that we are a continued legacy of African people, and we are our own people. So if we were, we are essentially like our own tribe, right? The African Americans. And it comes with all the different things that we have created here in the United States, right? It comes with our blues and our jazz and our greens and our jambalaya and our dance and our catching of the Holy Spirit and the way that we, do ring shouts. It comes with our warriorhood, right? And all of those are at the same time distinctly African American and an expression of the legacy of Africa. So I'm having this battle in the public about to the extent to which we're African people, and to me, it's not a debate. It's not a debate. It's a fact, right? And so I'm literally finding myself, like, to be honest, I mean, we're kind of used to hearing other conspiracies and ridiculousness, like from white folks in general, right? But to actually see Black people believing this and perpetuating these narratives is sad. So the other part is we're only Native American, we are not African. That's another grand myth. All right. So let me just clear it up here and now. You can be, like I am, African with Native American ancestry and therefore be African American. That is not a choice that you have to make, right? And similarly, there is no I'm only Native American. It just does not exist in the American construct. And so I didn't know that this idea had permeated from YouTube into American popular culture. So most recently, I was told that Waka Flocka Flame, talked about his Native American ancestry and so on, and like which was different from and separate from and exclusive of being an African. It's ridiculous. And honestly, if we look at the history, we see very clearly that African people and indigenous people, we mixed with each other, we ran away with each other, we found refuge in each other's communities, we built communities and maroon societies right next to each other, we intermarried with one another, and some of us were also enslaved by some of those Native American tribes. All of those things happened, and we can embrace all of that history. So that's one thing. And then I think, it's Juneteenth. So I'm going to dispel the Juneteenth myth. This idea that we did not know about the Emancipation Proclamation, and it took us 2 years. Honestly, you know what? Because of that myth, I think that it delayed my celebration of Juneteenth, right? Because I come from a very Pan-African community, and so I was like, "What are you talking about? What do you mean they didn't know? And why is this a holiday? Like, are we supposed to be celebrating the fact that they didn't know?" No, the fact of the matter is, Confederate States, and I'm going to tip my hat to my historian friend Dexter Gabriel and Sahari Johnson, who taught about the colored troops, right? The fact of the matter is, we kept up with the news from newspapers. I mean, keep in mind, David Walker's appeal was written, right? His appeal to the colored men of the United States. They would sew David Walker's appeal in coat pockets and take them down on the trains. You know what I mean? And on boats, they would literally hide and tuck things. So the fact that we get all the way to the 1863, and it took 2 years for people in Texas to know that the Emancipation Proclamation was real. No, it was that it needed to be enforced. They needed the troops to arrive to enforce their freedom. The Confederate States were some of the harshest states. Texas was the most harshest of all. Texas was considered a safe haven for slave owners. Slave owners they brought about 100,000 of those enslaved to have safe haven for themselves and their property in Texas. Texas is proud to be the last stronghold, in the country. And so the importance was that the 29th Cavalry, the 29th Infantry, which did cause Robert E. Lee to surrender in Appomattox, and then they came to Galveston, Texas. We don't want to give all the credit to, General Granger, right? Just because he stated issue number 3, the order number 3, but it meant like that enforcement was there. To arrive with roughly 2,000 troops is a whole other situation than just telling them, yeah, y'all know that president over there, the president of the the United States over there said that we're free. No. So I want us to end this myth now and forever, end the ideal of overly praising Abraham Lincoln for freeing the slaves. We need to end this idea of the white savior, be it Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves in the Confederate States as a military strategy in 1863. And we, as in the colored troops, as in Black people, as in Black abolitionists, we are the ones that made slavery untenable in the United States. We were breaking tools, burning barns, engaged in slave insurrections, engaged in legal fights. You know what I mean? We taught about our slave narratives. We created the Underground Railroad. We made it untenable. And so we did have assistance from our white allies, and we appreciate that. But don't ever get it twisted that we were the ones that were making it untenable. And also that when it came time for us to join the Civil War, that we joined the Civil War. And this is also to correct a myth, right? There were three entities of us, right? There were those who were enslaved and freed in 1863 who fought in the Civil War. There were those free Blacks from the North. Can you imagine being a free Black person from the North and saying, I'm joining the Army because I know that if they're not free, I will never be free. That's what Martin Delany thought. That's why he became one of the first majors. That's what Frederick Douglass thought. And they knew that in their experience. And then there were people from the Caribbean that came over from Haiti and the Dominican Republic and other places to fight in the Civil War. And so this ends this whole African versus, nativist American debate. It ends that debate. The facts do matter, and we have to teach these facts at all times. So those are just two different ways that I am personally dispelling this myth. We have a lot more to go. I feel convicted. I need to do more. And I do plan to do more. And so those are just two of the ways. I'm sure everybody else has more. And thank you, Jan, for asking. And we'll talk some more about these mythologies. All right, y'all.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure where the static is coming from, everyone, but bear with us. So we are pretty much at time, but I'm asking if the panelists can give us just a couple more minutes. There are 2 questions from the audience, and then I would like us to close. If you can answer, they're directed to specific panelists. If you can answer these questions quickly. This is from Sharon Johnson. Seeing the influence of popular culture TV has had in bringing more Black history to more people, have any of you been approached to be hired to collaborate or consult with writer producers on programming? Would you consider it? Anyone? Have you been approached?
I'll definitely consider it.
Okay.
Hey, I got a lot of storylines for folks, so.
Okay, great. And I believe you put your website in the chat. So Sharon, if you wanted to follow up, please go to Nkechi Taifa's website to follow up. And this is from Sister Evelyn Taylor. Do we need to remind this government of what their definition of reparations is? And then Black people fall in that category. As to Attorney Nkechi, we must keep reminding this government we are not making up this definition of reparations. And that
well, they know their history. Well, actually, maybe they don't know their history. I don't know. Maybe they don't know. Maybe the white folks today, I'm not quite sure. But that's why it's critical that true history be taught, and all of these moves to remove a true history from the classrooms is just a bunch of hogwash. I mean, this should be, it should be part of it. It is history. It is history. That 1862, I think it was a Compensated Emancipation Act. This is history. Lincoln signed it. Say, we will free you, those who enslaved people in DC, but we're going to pay the slave owners $300 per head. I mean, this is history. What happened in Haiti is history. What happened with General Sherman's Field Order number 15, granting all of that land and then all of that being taken away. This is history. So yeah, that's one reason why all this needs to be in the schools. And this is part of what HR 40 would be doing as well, making sure that the documentation for all of this is known, the commission to study and develop reparation proposals. This is what the state of California is doing right now. State of New York is about to pass theirs. All over the country, jurisdictions are passing task forces to look at the issues of what about, Juneteenth, the enslavement and all in their own backyard. So we're making history, right now, and opening up these caskets.
And can I just add very quickly, as Nkechi knows, we have had 3 in the last year and a half judicial hearings on the issue of HR 40 and reparations. Trust that our coalition working on this, our panelists who testified, we gave the US Congress the history. So the members of Congress cannot claim that they don't understand the history and this linkage, because we've laid it out to them in both oral and written testimony, and it is part of the record.
Thank you, Nicole. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. We have one more question. Someone can answer this very quickly, and then we'll go into the final remarks. From Angela A. I feel Juneteenth celebration should include ritual or some strong symbolism, have lights cast in the sky like they do in NYC for 9/11. I envision red, green lights projected into the skies throughout cities in our nation on Juneteenth. Thoughts? Dr. Page, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I imagine that people are doing that all across the country. I've seen a lot of notices of Juneteenth celebrations, and like we've said already, this isn't new. It's been celebrated in many parts of America for years, and so I think that's a beautiful vision, and I would love to see it too. But I suspect that there are people doing it. I want to believe that.
Thank you so much. I want to say thank you to each and every one of our panelists. Now we're going into final remarks. The question I want to ask each of you is, what do you foresee as the future of Black freedom? I know that's a loaded question, but if we can keep it to 30, 60 seconds each, that would be great. Starting with Dr. Ellis.
Oh, the pressure, the pressure. So, you know what? My idea of freedom today is very practical, because when you lose your family members and you're confronted with your mortality, you realize that, like, yes, I mean, I say this and I still think that I'm a young person. So like when I talk to Nkechi, I'm like, wait a minute, wait, let's understand this. Honestly, I want fresh air for my people. I want the absence of daily terrors of violence. I want the absence of high fructose corn syrup. And I want fresh vegetables and soursop for everybody, and pineapples and mangoes. And I know that that may seem very basic, but this idea, so let me add, because these are my closing thoughts. I'm a consultant. I'm the artistic and digital director and fundraiser for Panifest Festival in Ghana. Make sure you go to panifestghana.com and come. But when I think about that relationship, the fact that Kwame Nkrumah did not initially have the grades to get into Lincoln University. He went to the HBCU. He met different people. He was mentored by Du Bois. He went to Pan-African Congresses. He comes back to his country, decides to create a Pan-African country, and then chooses to reintroduce the people in the so-called Gold Coast to their own ancient history and rename the Gold Coast Ghana. That is one of the most beautiful things you can do. And then to make it a Pan-African country, that's the history. And yes, the United States, you know, is definitely responsible for the coup that displaced him, but the legacy continues. And I think that oftentimes we think that we need to go so hard, you know, with red, black, and green and Black power, and we got to go real hard, right? And then I look and I'm like, no, actually, the reason why you should bare minimum vacation to Ghana, bare minimum have a second home and or move, is literally for the fresh air, for the peace, for the absence of many levels of violence that we have here in the United States, for the fresh food, for your ability to once in your life kick up your feet and just listen to the ocean waves and know that this type of a lifestyle is not just for quote unquote white people or quote unquote rich people. It is yours for the taking. We need to reimagine our freedom in a way that is not constantly filled with protest and war. I think that especially for those of us as Black women, we're carving out a new path. And I like and I dislike the idea that we are always perpetuated as these strong warriors, right? That we're at the forefront of our community, because we are also suffering as a result of that. And I think that we need to make a pivot that is heavily focused on self-care and the self-care of our communities. And quite frankly, some of us, we just need to pick up and move. If that is from the North to the American South, if that's from the American South to the continent, if it is maintaining two homes, something like that. My idea of freedom is literally the ability for us to live our lives as our grandparents, not even our ancestors, right? As our grandparents imagined. So I'll end there. Thank you so much, Jan, for having me today.
Thank you. Aya, your thoughts?
Well, how do I say this in a short period of time? I'll tell you about a personal dream. One of my goals is to purchase, I'm looking at a piece of land right now that's 730 some acres in Alabama, of all places. I'm in Texas, like it's not bad enough here. I'm gonna move to Alabama. But it's fertile land, and it's land where I can see being able to create a healing center, similar to what Dr. Ellis was saying, where, you know, really traumatized women, Black women, families can come, eat from the soil, just breathe, reconnect, ground themselves, discover new, you know, talents or skills. I'm really at a point in my life where I want to minimize all of these trappings that we feel that we need to have, because they just enslave us in a different way, in all the ways that we have embraced capitalism. And I really envision our freedom as Black people as being that simple, where we can go back to just being able, what do you really need to live, right? Do we need all of these stocks and bonds and whatever, you know, like Bitcoin? And now I hear about art that is not just virtual, like it's invisible, but you're buying it, right? I mean, all of these things that we're buying into, when we just really need air, water, clean air, and good food. And like I was telling my parents, even how we built our homes was the epitome of sustainable science, right? Like, like everything that we used in building was biodegradable. It did not destroy the earth. And then we abandoned all of that for all of these trappings that are literally killing us. I have a brother battling cancer right now. And so at the core of my being, I just want to see Black people return to the basics and to be able to just be. For those who come from a Christian faith, you know, think of the Garden of Eden. It wasn't all of these highfalutin stuff, right? And for the rest of us who maybe are ready to look for or embrace a different kind of spirituality, this is where I am. Spiritually, I would love for my people to go back to understanding our relationship with our Creator at a whole different level than a Christianity that has been packaged to enslave us mentally, physically, and in so many other ways. I just want us to be free. I really think it starts with our spirituality, and then it just ebbs into and flows into everything else. And that's what I want for my people.
Thank you so much. Dr. Page?
I'm still trying to figure out the answer to this question. That was I agree. I think Kimberly, Dr. Ellis actually summed it all up very well. My first thought was, if we could just feel good about who we are, that would be the first step. No stress, no drama, no trauma, just feel good about who we are as people. That's part of what Aya was saying too. I feel like that's one good start for Black people being free, because nobody wants us to feel good about who we are. And we seem to continue to perpetuate their desires through all different behaviors.
Thank you so much. Nicole?
You know, I want to say that everything that has been said about what freedom is and should encompass, I think the answer to your overarching question is all of this collectively, because it is not one thing. It is a panoply of actions, and there's a panoply of representations that reflect our freedom. The only thing I would add is this. I don't want us to lose this moment that we are in. You know, we have a habit in this country of folks focusing on something because it's of the moment and because it's hot or it's popular, or because everybody is focused on it. This moment that we're in, where we have the whole country, even if they don't like it, talking about race, talking about equity, and talking about justice, I want us to hold on to this sense of freedom that we have to have these conversations, to use the word Black, to use the word race, and not have to apologize for it, not have to explain it. And I want us to hold on to this moment of freedom in which we can say to white folk, it is your job to figure this out. It is not my job to figure it out for you. So that has to be an important part of our freedom and how we maintain it. We cannot let this country or the world forget what we have been experiencing and the justice that we see and that we must have, not just for Black folks in the United States, but for the entire trans-global diaspora. Having that power, having that freedom to be who we are, to claim our own rights, to be authentic, and to claim our own justice has to be something that we maintain.
Thank you. Nkechi, you get the last word on the future of Black freedom.
I'm going to be very succinct. Freedom is the right to self-determination, to define ourselves, name ourselves, and speak for ourselves, instead of having other people do that for us. And Jam, since I used less than my 30 seconds, I want to throw it back to you. First, really, thank you for bringing us together, Jessica Ann. And I want to hear the answer. You answer that question before you close us out. I did less than 30 seconds. So what is freedom, Jessica Ann Mitchell, Iowa?
Oh, Lord, now you put me on the spot. I was trying to hear from y'all, but honestly, I agree with much of what all of you said today. Freedom to me, the future of Black freedom to me does mean self-determination. It also means a reclamation of ourselves, a reimagining of ourselves, because we've been told so many lies and internalized them. And it has harmed us in so many ways, from the way that we look at ourselves to the way that we interact with each other, to the way in which we exist in this world, to the way in which we fight for our human and civil rights. And so I think that the future of Black freedom is a world in which we are not afraid to imagine the unimaginable. People have told us that reparations is unimaginable. Right, it can happen. People told our ancestors that freedom from slavery was unimaginable. But we had ancestors like my ancestors down in South Carolina in the Stonewall Rebellion that decided to give it a try anyway. And we fought and we fought and we fought. And what people conceived of as unimaginable, you see us here today. There in some people's minds and imagination, even this panel, these conversations, these Juneteenth commemorations that we're having today, 100 or so years ago or 200 years ago were unimaginable in the eyes of this nation. But here we are standing today. So I want, for the future of Black freedom, for me, it means daring to imagine and keep using our creativity to create a world that sustains us and makes us whole again. So I hope that does answer your question that you tossed back to me.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Oh.
Ashe. So I wanted to say thank you so much for each and every one of us, for you joining us today. Thank you to Attorney Nkechi Taifa, founder of the Taifa Group, convener of the Justice Roundtable, author of Black Power, Black Lawyer, My Audacious Quest for Justice. Thank you to Dr. Gina Page, president and co-founder of African Ancestry. Thank you to Nicole Austin Hillary, executive director, U.S. Program, Human Rights Watch. Thank you to Dr. Kimberly C. Ellis, AKA Dr. Goddess, historian, storyteller, curator. Thank you to Rosalind Y. Daniels that had to leave a little bit early, founder of Black Health Matters. And thank you to my sister, Aya Anelli, speaker, activist, life coach and CEO of Aya Anelli International. Each and every one of you women are a blessing and an inspiration. And it was just wonderful to have you share your insight and voices with us today. Again, I want to say thank you to everyone. Happy Juneteenth. Let's continue working, learning, and growing together. We'll be doing more of these events for the rest of the year on different topics affecting our community. If you'd like to reach out, reach us at info@nbcit.org. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a blessed weekend and happy Juneteenth.